This is a world without fossil fuels. From birth, people possess magical powers granted by quartz. They create powerful mechs and various weapons. However, Rygart is an anomaly, the only person without magic. This means he cannot use any devices and is considered useless. He nearly died of thirst in the desert until Baldur arrived just in time to give him water, narrowly saving his life. Baldur looked at him as if he was looking at a monkey, marveling that someone without magic actually existed. Then, he took Rygart back to the capital on a motorcycle. The iron-armored guard at the gate greeted them as they entered the city. As an adult, Rygart visited the capital for the first time. Queen Sigyn had been waiting for his arrival. She pulled out a gun and aimed it at Rygart. As her best friend, Rygart had failed to attend her wedding. However, after Rygart explained himself, Sigyn rushed to embrace him. The soldiers were curious about Rygart's identity and his interaction with the queen. Rygart was taken into the royal palace, where he and King Hodur, also a close friend, shared no formalities typically due between a king and his subject. Hodur had important matters to discuss with him, as the world was in turmoil with nations invading each other using mechs. Not long ago, the Empire of Athens successfully annexed the Kingdom of Assam using military force. However, Athens' ambition did not stop there. They launched a war against their own nation, Krishna. The enemy's main forces have already crossed the border defenses, led by their close friend Zes. Rygart was hesitant to believe this because Zes is a genius mech warrior who despises war more than anyone and had joined the volunteer army to stop his older brother from waging war. However, Sigyn's expression told Rygart that things were not so simple. King Hodur said that it was only a matter of time before the Mizoram fortress on the border would be breached. Upon hearing this, Rygart considered evacuating and taking his brother to hide in the deep mountains. Ministers mocked him as a powerless waste, but the king intervened. Without magic, Rygart cannot use any equipment, and it seemed he could not be of any help. King Hodur took Rygart to a mysterious cave where they discovered an ancient mech from 1,000 years ago that showed no signs of quartz usage. Since all current mech warriors were unable to operate it, they speculated that ancient people lacked magical powers. Ancient mechs required a non-magical operator, making Rygart the ideal candidate. However, Rygart was reluctant to join the war. Their military was no match for Athens, and he preferred surrendering for a peaceful coexistence. Initially, Hodur agreed to surrender, but the conditions offered by the enemy were shocking. They demanded total surrender of sovereignty and the execution of all royal family members, including Sigyn, who was of commoner origin. Athens' intention was not reconciliation, but suppression, which left Rygart furious. Suddenly, the cave entrance was attacked. Alarm bells rang throughout the capital, and all personnel were put on high alert. However, the attackers hid in the shadows, smashing the guarding mechs. In the chaos, the guards pinpointed the enemy's location and informed Hodur to take refuge. But a fallen mech triggered a collapse, hitting Rygart's location directly. He had no choice but to seek refuge inside an ancient mech. In a flurry of pressing buttons randomly, the ancient mech was accidentally activated, displaying a row of strange characters. On the ground, an enemy soldier shot and shattered the controls of a mech, then spotted survivors and aimed her gun at them, including Hodur. She realized she was facing the enemy king and thought she was about to achieve a great feat. At that moment, Rygart pressed the login button, and the ancient mech was officially activated. As a non-magical being chosen by a true god, only he could operate the ancient weapon. Rygart drove the mech out of the cave, stepping on the arm of the enemy's mech. Lee, thinking it was a new model from Krishna, was surprised as Rygart awoke in the cockpit. Lee then aimed her gun at him, but ordinary bullets did no damage. Deciding to switch to explosive rounds, Lee was caught off guard as Rygart quickly maneuvered the ancient mech, smashing Lee's mech against a wall and knocking her unconscious. To ensure safety, Rygart used the mech to pick up a nearby sword. Then, he saw Hodur on the screen, but was unaware of enemy reinforcements approaching from behind. The ancient mech was knocked down, and at that moment, the three close friends found themselves together. But Zes did not recognize Rygart in the cockpit and aimed his gun at the ancient mech. Despite Hodur's warnings, he did not believe it was Rygart, as Rygart, being non-magical, should not have been there. Fortunately, Rygart managed to push the gun away. When Zess swung his sword at Rygart, he blocked it with a broken blade. However, being inexperienced with the mech, Rygart quickly found himself at a disadvantage. General Balder arrived in time with superior numbers. Zess had no choice but to retreat immediately with Lee. Balder's primary mission was to protect the king, not to pursue them. The ancient mech was transported back to the capital. The queen rushed to check on Rygart's safety first. After ensuring he was unharmed, she asked him to write a report on the mech's operation and eagerly began researching the ancient mech. They dismantled the mech but could not understand its structure, as the current technology could not disassemble its inner framework. The ancients seemed different. The mech's body was made of a metal with good thermal bonding properties, while the interior used quartz with poor thermal bonding. The external armor was severely corroded, yet the internal framework was intact. Surprisingly, the internal quartz was crudely made, as if crafted for a final mission. Sigyn continued to question Rygart on how he surfaced from underground. Rygart said he simply jumped up, but the height was at least 20 meters, which seemed impossible without acceleration. Yet, that was the fact, and Rygart did not know how to explain it. At that moment, General True returned from the front line, vowing to stop Athens' atrocities. Looking at the ancient mech, battered and worn, Rygart couldn't help but feel a kinship, as both were often scorned. Early in the morning, Zess was observing Krishna's military strength. There were roughly fewer than 200 mechs in total, with over 100 dispersed for defense across various locations, leaving about 80 available for combat. Their goal was to launch a surprise attack and destroy more than 20 enemy mechs with just 5 soldiers. An alarm was sounded within the capital, and all available mechs were deployed. However, none of the warriors could start the ancient mech, so Rygart had to demonstrate it himself. This is a world filled with war, where nations vie for quartz resources using super mechs. However, becoming a mech warrior requires magical abilities. Rygart is one of the rare individuals without magic, but he is also the man chosen by the ancients. Only he can operate the ancient mech Delphine. He has been invited by the king to the capital to defend against foreign invaders. Yet, the situation is urgent. The genius warrior Zess is already at their doorstep. All soldiers in the capital are on standby, deployed in strategic positions, determined to defend the city gates. However, General True, ignoring advice, pilots a mech still under development, wanting to abandon defense for an offensive. Balder tries to stop him, but both hold equal rank, and True does not heed warnings. Zess and his squad observe the situation within the city from afar. If the defenders persist, their small group of 5 would struggle to break through. Thus, they plan to lure the mechs out of the city walls. Suddenly, the tightly shut gates open. Elect, using binoculars, spots an unfamiliar black mech emerging, continually gesturing in sign language. Zess is shocked to learn the sign's message, deciding to negotiate alone. Elect is instantly confused. Even during the intense civil war in the Kingdom of Assam, Zess always remained calm, yet now he is visibly shaken. Driving the black mech is his dear friend, Rygart. After 4 years, the two meet again, this time on the battlefield. Zess steps out of the cockpit with a question. Why can Rygart operate that mech? Rygart does not answer his question, instead questioning why Zess would attack Hodor's nation. Zess claims Athens has a just cause in this war, but questions what justice the aggressor holds. It turns out the war was sparked by the Kingdom of Orlando, who had waged war through Krishna's territory against the Kingdom of Assam. Krishna's inaction implied approval of Orlando's ambitions. Although Zess knows Hodor was manipulated, Athens must retaliate. Thus, the peaceful solution is to persuade Hodor to surrender. Zess hopes Rygart can assist him, but Athens' terms for surrender are unacceptable. Meanwhile, True leads his troops toward the west gate, planning to encircle them while Zess attacks the north gate. Elect detects True's movements and signals Zess to retreat. Subsequently, Zess aims his gun at Rygart, stating that Krishna's fall is only a matter of time and hopes Rygart can convince the king. They are just the first troop. If General Borkuse of the second troop arrives with his 200 mechs, he would flatten the area. Surrender now seems the wisest choice. However, Rygart believes in their friendship. Certain Zess won't shoot him. Both men anticipate the other's moves. but Rygart overestimates the bond between men. After the countdown, Zess intentionally misses, but hits Delphine's right shoulder. Although the shot was off target, a nervous Rygart still desperately flees, amazed by Delphine's speed. Inside the city, Baldur sees Rygart being chased and orders all troops to strike. However, the Allied forces can't keep up with Rygart's speed. Meanwhile, True's squad has entered the canyon, unaware they are completely targeted by the enemy. Under heavy fire suppression, True's squad was nearly wiped out. Lieutenant Narvi realized they had walked into an ambush. General True, unhappy about being ambushed, drew his close combat weapon for a direct confrontation, but his weapon was quickly knocked out of his hands. Then, True attempted to sacrifice himself to cover the retreat of the younger soldiers who were still alive. However, his subordinates shielded him at the front, using their shields to cover the retreat. Zess's squad took advantage of the victory and chased after them in their mechs. Unexpectedly, Rygart, hiding in a corner, was spotted by Lee, who was driven by anger from a previous defeat by Rygart. She aimed her gun at him. In a crisis, Rygart made Delphine leap, jumping 20 meters high on the spot, which shocked Lee. She realized that if such a model were mass-produced, no defense wall would hold. Lee had to destroy the mech and fired armor-piercing rounds at Rygart. But Delphine blocked all the bullets with its sword. Rygart seized the opportunity to charge at Lee with Delphine, attacking chaotically and causing Lee to lose her composure before she could react. Delphine then leaped into the air to attack. As a seasoned warrior, Lee kept her distance and continuously fired armor-piercing rounds. But the sword acted like a solid shield, causing no fatal damage to Delphine and wasting her ammunition. In a situation without supplies, the longer the fight dragged on, the more disadvantageous it became for Lee. Thus, Lee decided to engage in close combat, which was exactly what Rygart anticipated. He quickly knocked down Lee's mech with a single move. At a disadvantage, Lee fired again. Rygart has little time left. Delphine can only operate for 3 more minutes. Meanwhile, Lee is closing in, aiming her gun at Delphine's cockpit and firing 3 shots. However, she only manages to shatter the outer metal layer, leaving the internal framework intact. Driven by a will to survive, Rygart pushes the control stick forward, tearing off the shoulder of Lee's mech with Delphine's immense power, shocking Lee. She has no choice but to increase the distance between them once again. With only 2 minutes left for Delphine to cool down, Rygart opts for a tactical retreat. Lee follows in pursuit, but suddenly a bullet pierces the right leg of her mech. Rygart's teammate Dan has arrived and starts shooting at Lee. Rygart suddenly stops him, feeling it unnecessary to kill. However, it is a time of combat. The enemy has not surrendered, and enemy reinforcements might be nearby. Eliminating all threats is the best solution. Rygart suggests they could retreat and leave Lee to her own fate. But just as he speaks, an armor-piercing bullet penetrates Dan's cockpit, a grim reminder that mercy to an enemy can lead to fatal consequences, and one should never expose their back to the enemy. Seeing this, Rygart returns to his mech's cockpit and runs towards Lee, throwing his sword at her as she continues to shoot. Even at this point, Rygart refuses to kill, hoping Lee would surrender. Lee chooses to end her own life. Rygart leaps out of the cockpit, staring at the distant bloody sky, pondering unknown thoughts. For him, experiencing battle for the first time, the outcome is undoubtedly harsh. Meanwhile, Lee's teammate Cleo is still unaware of what has happened and waits for her return. Watching Rygart's lonely figure, the king plans to surrender to the enemy. Scientists are decrypting the script on Delphine. Sigyn comforts the dispirited Rygart. Since the Independence War 80 years ago, their education taught that both armies committed brutal crimes. Yet, Athens pursued a self-serving education. Lee, as a young soldier, was influenced by distorted facts from childhood, choosing to die rather than accept the insult of being called a barbarian. By now, Cleo has learned the truth and has locked herself inside her mech. Elect cannot understand why Zess allowed the inept Cleo to enlist. Zess explains that the Empire once had a damaged mech that usually took months for anyone to adapt to, but Cleo managed it in 1 day, proving her true genius. At dawn, Rygart, carrying his luggage, plans to leave, feeling useless. The queen falls silent, reminiscing their past together, and bids him farewell in her heart, likely their last meeting. Rygart walks alone on the lush grass, a breeze blowing. True is playing ball with the children, enjoying a brief, peaceful moment. Rygart then visits the cemetery, where Dan's wife is mourning him. Remembering the past events makes Rygart tremble involuntarily. After Dan's wife leaves, Rygart talks to the tombstone. Baldur, witnessing this, tells him he shouldn't feel guilty as Dan's death was no one's fault but his own misjudgment. However, Baldur hopes Rygart will join the next sortie because the king is about to surrender, a fact Rygart is well aware of. Still, Rygart chooses to leave. Before departing, the king comes out to see him off and gives him a bag of gold coins. Under the watchful eyes of an owl, Rygart's figure slowly fades into the distance. At this moment, Sigyn successfully decrypts the text on Delphine. This is a mech anime even better than Gundam. Major nations wage war over quartz resources. The small country of Krishna struggles to survive amidst this conflict. Rygart initially wanted to leave this war-torn country, but considering the queen's safety, he decides to stay in this dangerous place. The king joyfully awards him a top medal. The warriors are stunned by the mech controlled by Rygart. Delphine's armor weighs tens of tons, a load their mechs cannot even begin to carry. However, compared to modern mechs, Delphine requires cooling periods after intense operation, something Rygart must carefully manage. Later, Baldur's troops spot enemy movements. He invites Rygart to join the plan, advising him to set aside his mercy, as capturing an enemy is 3 times harder than killing one. Saving one enemy on the battlefield equates to the sacrifice of 3 comrades. The small squad then departs immediately. Zess's squad, now down to 4 mechs, is unaware that they have been spotted by the enemy. Zess leapt to the mountaintop to survey the surroundings and realized he was surrounded. He immediately ordered a temporary retreat, but it was already too late. Baldur led his team to attack fully. People in the canyon became moving targets. Cleo's mech was shattered. Zess jumped into the air, firing to cover his team, and easily took down 2 mechs. However, as the enemy's encirclement tightened, Zess led his team out of the canyon. They reached a clearing, thinking they had escaped the enemy. Unexpectedly, a light flickered in the distance. It was Rygart and Delphine arriving. Zess's subordinates prepared to cover from behind, but they could not penetrate Delphine's armor. Zess told him to dodge, but it was too late. The yellow mech was smashed, and Delphine's speed was unaffected. Rygart briefly mourned for him before charging at Zess and 2 others. Although they dodged in time, Rygart used his weight to stabilize, then charged again. Zess told his teammates to go ahead, preparing to fight Rygart alone. His 2 teammates disobeyed and covered him with gunfire, but Delphine was like a wall. Zess relied on special bullets to barely make a dent. Rygart realized he could be breached and seized the moment Zess was reloading. Rygart discarded his armor and grabbed the giant sword behind him, leaping into the air. Then, controlling the mech, he rushed at the 3, now recognizing the black mech that had troubled them before. Rygart had eyes only for Zess, aiming to destroy the pressure gun in his hands because only then could the unarmed Zess be captured. However, Zess was clearly stronger. He sidestepped Rygart's attack. If distance was created, Zess's teammates would open fire. Rygart realized his folly, thinking Zess would show mercy to his men. This way, he would surely be killed. However, Rygart pulled a switch, planted the sword into the ground to stop, then stepped on the blade and charged at Zess. The kingdom's entire mech force advances. Elect orders Cleo to retreat to the border, wanting to rescue Zess alone. Unbeknownst to him, Cleo has lost her sanity after Delphine killed all her companions. Furious, she charges at Delphine. Rygart sees the approaching mech but can't react in time. Cleo kicks Rygart, knocking him unconscious. This scene shocks Elect. However, the kingdom's main troops have arrived. To save Zess, Cleo stops targeting Rygart. She aims to hold off the enemy mechs as long as possible, using the terrain to create a smokescreen. The soldiers, blinded, watch and shoot at any shadow, falling into Cleo's trap. She bursts from the side of the smoke, easily smashing an enemy mech's head and using it as a shield to tackle another. Cleo's ferocity suffocates the enemy. Elect takes this chance to free Zess, who is badly injured but alive. Meanwhile, Cleo wreaks havoc among the enemy mechs, and charges at General Balder. Cleo is quickly subdued, but she attempts to retreat using her agility. However, Narvi stops her, shooting through the left leg of her mech. Seeing this, Elect has no choice but to retreat. Krishna achieves a brief victory. Cleo is captured by the soldiers, but has already set her sights on Rygart. The kingdom's generals discuss how to deal with her. Rygart suggests returning her to Athens. However, there is a risk that she might commit suicide during this period. Sigyn offers to imprison Cleo herself. She then unlocks Cleo's handcuffs and brings her to a room. Sigyn plans to win Cleo over emotionally and returns a ring representing her family, which indeed has an effect. Cleo cannot believe such generosity from a barbarian. Sigyn assures her that she will be safe and relatively free as long as she stays in the room. Despite this, Cleo is determined to leave Krishna. She takes advantage of a moment when Sigyn is off guard, tackles her onto the bed from behind, steals her gun, and orders Sigyn to undress. Cleo puts on Krishna's attire and forces Sigyn to take her to the mech hangar. Meanwhile, Rygart is deep in thought on the balcony. Cleo recognizes him as Delphine's pilot, her greatest enemy, and points the gun at him. At that moment, an owl comes to Rygart's aid, tormenting him overhead, which triggers memories of Zess, who cared for owls during their school days. Hidden in the corner, Cleo suddenly bursts out, nervously pulling the trigger, but the gun has no bullets. It turns out Sigyn, fearing guns, never loaded it. Thus, Cleo's plan fails, and she is led away by the soldiers. Today, Sigyn announced the formation of a 5-person squad with a new member named Gurge. His name alone shocked everyone, as Gurge is known to be a true monster. Piloting a red mech, he began by ambushing Rygart during training. Rygart narrowly evaded his attack, prompting Gurge to rate his defense between 60 and 80 points. Without giving Rygart a chance to respond, Gurge charged down from a mountain peak. In a desperate move, Rygart picked up a shield and strapped it to his arm, but the red mech sliced it off. Gurge then spun his longsword at Rygart, but Rygart caught his wrist and seized the weapon. Unexpectedly, the supposedly indestructible sword broke in Rygart's hands, leaving him in doubt. Seizing the moment, Gurge attacked again, lifting a pressure gun and firing at Delphine. Rygart, unable to resist, kept increasing the distance between them. Despite being overwhelmed, Rygart earned Gurge's respect, leading him to revise his earlier assessment and rate Rygart's defense between 70 and 150. However, as Delphine stumbled over crushed rocks, the red mech closed in. Suddenly, Rygart's reinforcements arrived, cornering Gurge against a mountain wall. 4 against 1, and yet Gurge emerged victorious. It was his first time piloting the red mech, meant only for a training session with 4 others. Delphine's mech was left in a sorry state. Rygart couldn't help but wonder who Gurge really was. Staring at his shield split in 2, he was filled with doubt. Gurge had cut through his weapon, yet he couldn't do the same. Was there some special technique involved? Sigyn suggested that Rygart should not team up with Gurge, as he was more dangerous than the enemy. Yet Rygart was willing to endure anything to repel Athens' invasion, though the queen was worried. Then, Balder approached Rygart to discuss Gurge, revealing that Gurge was his only son, who had killed a comrade during training a year ago without any apparent reason. No one understood what he was thinking. Balder warned Rygart not to trust Gurge and to take immediate action if he made any suspicious moves. Rygart, however, refused, suggesting that any issues between father and son should be resolved through communication and that if necessary, he would take action himself. Rygart left Balder with a striking image. Her beloved man was set to depart for war today. Thus, Sigyn went directly to Rygart's room, looking somewhat nervous for some reason. Rygart, a straightforward man, failed to grasp the intention behind a woman visiting him alone just before he was to go to battle. He even thought he had done something wrong, which only made Sigyn angrier. She assured him he had done nothing wrong, but Rygart said that if that were true, he would die with regrets. The thought of Rygart dying made Sigyn feel suffocated. She stated that she would not be angry if he returned safely. Subsequently, Rygart made a promise to Sigyn. Little did they know, Krishna's vanguard had already been ambushed by the enemy. General True's squad was completely wiped out. Their latest mech was crushed into 2 halves by an enemy's blue mech. General True died en route to the battlefield. The leader of the attacking team was General Borkus from Athens, who destroyed nearly 50 of Krishna's main mechs with minimal losses on their side. Balder received the news about True's situation. Despite being 30,000 meters from the border, it seemed the boundary might have already been breached. Yet Narvi was unaware of this intelligence, leading her squad through a back route. At that moment, Balder's army spotted the enemy. They had only 50 mechs, 20 fewer than Balder's forces. It was the perfect time to capture them all, especially since they held the advantageous terrain. Balder chose to hold his position defensively. However, Borkus ordered a full assault. His mechs split into two groups. Suddenly, a scout noticed a giant mech covered with cloth in the valley, presumed to be the command unit of Borkus, unprotected by the main force. It seemed like an ideal opportunity to capture the enemy leader. Balder sensed a possible trap, but Elsa was too assertive. She volunteered to lead a surprise attack, unaware that no enemy mechs stood in her way. Elsa's strike team was instantly annihilated, with 20 mechs wiped out by just 6. This brought Krishna's morale to an all-time low, which was precisely Borkus's plan. Fear paralyzes various functions of the body. Then, in front of the enemy troops, Borkus had Nike mutilate Elsa's body, aiming to break the enemy's last line of defense. However, Balder, experienced in battle, would not let Borkus have his way. He first encouraged his soldiers, then ordered an attack, transforming their fear into rage. With a resolve to die if necessary, Balder initiated the attack. Borkus was ready to meet his demands, and the two armies clashed head-on. As the Krishna army was on the brink of collapse, a loud explosion was heard from afar. Rygart, piloting the Delphine, arrived at the battlefield. Single-handedly, he engaged Borkus's left-wing squad. Delphine, like a wild horse unleashed, furiously destroyed the enemy mechs, but its armor had already lost 3 layers. If Rygart still wished to avoid killing, he needed to immediately withdraw from the battlefield. At that moment, Rygart had a realization. He decided to adapt to killing, stabbing his weapon into the enemy's cockpit. However, his attack was blocked, and he was immobilized. The enemy used him as a live target. Rygart then abandoned his armor and leaped high into the air, stunning Borkus's forces with the altitude. Mid-air, Rygart reloaded and hit the enemy with 3 darts. As Delphine plummeted, it became a target, but Rygart's teammates had already secured positions to cover him. Their plan was successful, and Rygart was instructed to retreat. Meanwhile, Narvi led the remaining 2 members to flank the enemy. Unexpectedly, Gurge's mech did not move. It turned out Gurge was afraid inside the cockpit, admitting it was his first real battle. This put Narvi in a difficult position. She decided to leave Gurge behind and proceeded with just one other to attempt a surprise attack. At this time, Borkus was observing Delphine, noting its impressive agility and firepower, shrouded in mystery. Unbeknownst to Rygart, he had become the prey. Suddenly, the enemy, who had the upper hand, ordered a retreat. Narvi and her companion missed their target, puzzled by the enemy's intentions. Rygart saw everything, but his mech needed to cool down. Any rash move could stop him right in the middle of enemy territory, so he could not join the chase. This man possesses power so formidable that even gods would fear him. With only the worst-performing mech, he can instantly defeat the Empire's elite special forces, equipped with the finest gear. Yet, he is a monster, a blend of calm and madness. Acting independently in battle, he does not distinguish between friend and foe, ultimately leading to his imprisonment for killing a comrade. However, faced with the invasion of the Athens Empire, the kingdom of Krishna had no choice but to release him. Unexpectedly, Gurge turned out to be a professional actor. On the battlefield, he was so terrified that he trembled and could not move. Narvi's surprise attack squad missed the perfect opportunity for a stealth attack as Borkus's forces completely withdrew. Nike was baffled. It was a crushing victory for them, yet it appeared as if they had been defeated. Bades explained that it was a strategic retreat, intended to regroup with reinforcements. The atmosphere among the troops was somewhat relaxed. However, suddenly, one of their mechs was taken down by a single strike. Borkus looked up to see a red mech standing on the mountaintop. Gurge alone had blocked their path. Faced with a sudden attack, Borkus was caught off guard, but they quickly recovered. One mech tried to flank Gurge from above, but had its arm torn off using its own momentum. This intense scene was fully witnessed by Rygart from a high vantage point. Gurge then created distance, firing while evasively maneuvering to dodge incoming attacks. However, Borkus unexpectedly ambushed and broke Gurge's longsword. Even when surrounded by enemy mechs with far superior capabilities, Gurge returned to his team almost unscathed. He intended to brush off the incident casually, but Rygart had already reported his behavior. It turned out his earlier fear was an act to drive his teammates away, viewing them as liabilities. He believed solo combat was more effective than team efforts, and had destroyed 7 enemy mechs. However, Gurge's potential for losing control was a catastrophic risk to his own side. Consequently, Narvi banned him from handling guns and mechs, assigning him to maintenance duties instead. Rygart grew more curious about Gurge's past. A year earlier, Baldur had returned from the frontier to the capital, when Gurge had already been imprisoned. Attempting to understand his mindset, Baldur was met with ruthless mockery. Gurge remained silent about the incident involving 10 mechs, including his own, during a training march where he defeated all 9 of his teammates' mechs without any damage to his own. After the event, he turned himself in. However, Rygart questioned the authenticity of this report, as no one knew the true details. Late at night, the morale of Borkus's squad was low. Without the reinforcement troops, even the general's life was in jeopardy. Nike was consumed with thoughts of revenge. They had successfully regrouped with the main force, totaling 120 mechs, matching Krishna's strength at the outpost. Choosing to spend the night in his cockpit, Borkus was exhilarated by his near-death experience. The next morning, Gurge was somewhat bored. Narvi allowed him to approach the mechs but explicitly forbade him from boarding without her orders. Just then, a scout hurriedly reported that Borkus was on the move, and their direction was towards Rygart's hometown, where his brother still lived in the village. However, they couldn't act rashly amidst the march. Narvi prepared to inform Baldur to devise a plan, but Rygart ignored her orders. He decided to check on his own and drove the Delphine out of the camp. In the capital of Krishna, Cleo pestered Sigyn for a bedtime story, especially about the time Rygart broke into the girls' dormitory. But before they could enter the dormitory gate, they were driven away by stun guns and eventually had to rely on Zess to intervene. It seems that no matter how mature a man is, a rebellious devil resides within his heart. The relationship between the two women grew warmer, but Sigyn could never have imagined that Rygart, whom she constantly thought about, was now caught in the greatest crisis of his life. Rygart arrived alone in his hometown, only to find it decimated by the Athens army. He was stunned by the carnage. A sudden attack forced Rygart to hide his mech behind a building. Borkus, exhilarated, had planned a detour, but unexpectedly spotted the Delphine. While his soldiers continued to provide suppressive fire, Borkus ordered them to stop and charged at Rygart alone. Rygart, caught off guard, wondered if Borkus wanted a duel. He adopted a defensive stance, but his shield was shattered and his attacks were blocked by Borkus's tail. Rygart was clearly at a disadvantage in the initial exchange. He then made Delphine leap up, firing darts that only knocked off Borkus's hat. Rygart swung his weapon at Borkus's head, but Borkus dodged easily. Borkus charged, and Delphine knelt on one knee, pulling out a nunchaku to break Borkus's sword. Rygart swept with the nunchaku, but Borkus's tail tangled with it. In the multi-joint weapon fight, Borkus had the upper hand and snapped the nunchaku's chain. Rygart quickly switched to a lance attack, which Borkus also evaded. Under fire from Borkus's stun gun, Rygart's lance was completely destroyed, but Borkus himself also fell to the ground. He told Rygart it was the best chance to kill him, guessing Rygart was in the village for a reason. However, all the villagers had already been slaughtered. It was too late. Borkus's words deeply angered Rygart. Borkus proved too cunning. As he was hit, he made his mech float up. Had it been close to the ground, the impact might have destroyed its frame. Instead, he only lost a layer of iron. Delphine's only remaining weapon was a curved sword. After a brief clash, Borkus had completely seen through Rygart. The current quartz tendons couldn't possibly perform such maneuvers. Delphine must be a product of ancient technology. so Borkus intended to capture it for research. However, Rygart wasn't going to sit idly by. He resisted with all his remaining strength. Nevertheless, Rygart's lack of combat experience showed as he only knew how to attack in straight lines, unable to adapt to sudden changes. Borkus ordered that Delphine be captured unharmed and returned to his country. As for the pilot Rygart, the plan was to break the cockpit and kill him, deducing that Delphine's power did not belong to the pilot. Borkus's interest was now solely in the red mech. Unbeknownst to him, Narvi's squad had been observing everything from afar. Just as the soldiers were about to cut into the cockpit, Rygart suddenly opened his eyes. He tried to stand up in Delphine, which only had 6 minutes of operational time left, but was pinned down by 5 mechs. At that moment, Narvi ordered an attack that distracted the enemy. Rygart instantly tore the chains and leaped towards Narvi's direction. Though he rejoined his teammates, Rygart needed to learn a lesson from this ordeal. Realizing his mistake, the whole squad prepared to retreat, but the enemy had pursued them to this point. They were forced back into the valley by enemy fire. Gurge suddenly flashed a mysterious smile and charged out alone. Seeing this, Rygart followed him, but the mechs providing cover were hit, and Narvi's arm was severed. However, she quickly used her foot to flip up her shield, barely blocking Nike's bullets. Despite missing an arm, her combat ability was significantly reduced. Rygart told Gurge to hurry back and help, but Gurge ignored him. After all, it was Rygart's disregard for orders and acting independently that led to this unexpected battle. Moreover, such foolish actions had not even accomplished their initial goal of finding his brother. Gurge argued that the existence of the weak is a sin in itself, as they always hold each other back. Therefore, he told Rygart not to blame himself, asserting that even if Narvi and the others were to die, it would not be his fault. Gurge's words made Rygart angrily charge at him. At that moment, Narvi's mech was in shambles, her cockpit clamped by a giant pincer. Although this exposed Nike's vulnerability, she still couldn't penetrate the enemy's mech, showcasing the disparity in manufacturing technology. As she was about to be crushed, Narvi escaped from the rear door of the cockpit and used Nike's blind spot to hide beside a mountain wall. Rygart and Gurge continued their internal conflict. Rygart used a maneuver called mouth escape on Gurge, saying, "You always talk big, but you're essentially just a child. You have immense talent, but treat everything as a game." Gurge remained unmoved and simply acknowledged this. He then challenged Rygart, asking, "What are you really fighting for? Don't give me grand statements about defending the country. What is your true desire?" Everyone could see it. Even the king endured silently. The driving force behind Rygart's continual fighting was his feelings for Sigyn. Gurge stated that if Rygart could defeat him, he would personally invade the capital and capture Sigyn for him. However, Rygart stubbornly declared that he was fighting to protect the capital. Gurge wasted no more words and initiated the second round of battle. Rygart positioned Delphine on one knee, ready to switch from defense to offense. Gurge used his foot to continuously suppress Delphine. If Rygart stood up at that moment, he would be instantly defeated, so he waited for Gurge to use an upper body attack. Just then, Gurge used his weapon. Rygart seized the opportunity to block his attack. Gurge initially wanted to settle the score with Rygart, but the Athens army arrived unexpectedly. Delphine was immobilized, but Gurge stood in front of him. Nike tried to crush the red mech using the superior technology of the Empire's mechs. However, Gurge easily broke free from control, highlighting the gap in strength. Even though Nike had a more advanced mech, Gurge was far superior and defeated her overwhelmingly. Had reinforcements not arrived, Nike would have been killed on the spot. Gurge and Rygart were surrounded by the enemy. Borkus sent his most elite special forces squad to deal with them, each member capable of fighting hundreds alone. With Delphine still inoperable, Gurge kicked Rygart away to get him off the battlefield. Gurge then used the terrain for cover and decided against staying in a lower position, which would be disadvantageous. He quickly abandoned his sniper position. However, he was ambushed from ahead, but Gurge's evasion skills were maxed out. He could dodge bullets at will and even make lateral moves in the air. He then shattered the enemy mech's armor with a single shot. Using just a standard pressure gun, Gurge was able to penetrate the highest grade of mech armor. Athens' elite forces had yet to realize how formidable their opponent was and decided to encircle him. One mech fired from a distance to limit Gurge's movements, while others charged to attack together. But Gurge closed in on one mech and used it as a shield, preventing the enemy from firing freely. However, they decided to prepare for indiscriminate shooting. With the combined effort of 4 soldiers, Gurge's mech lost a leg and an arm. Despite this, he could still intimidate enemies with a look. The enemy captain demanded Gurge's surrender, but he made his stance clear through his actions. Seeing this, the remaining soldiers immediately attacked. However, under Gurge's control, the damaged red mech seemed like a war god, single-handedly eliminating 3 more. Bades was shocked. They were the Empire's strongest squad. In anger, he charged and shot off another leg of the red mech. Yet, Gurge still managed to counterattack. Bades then used his intact mech to overpower the red mech, gaining complete control over Gurge. But at that moment, Delphine regained power. Rygart threw his sword, shattering the opponent's cockpit, and nearly fell off a cliff due to inertia. In that brief second, a monster like Gurge could turn the tide. Bades pierced the red mech's cockpit, but Gurge had already escaped. Gurge became legendary in one battle, wiping out Athens' most elite special forces squad alone. However, this was his last battle. An enemy division had already arrived on the battlefield. Gurge had no mech left to control and had to protect Rygart. The nation is on the brink of collapse. The greatest genius warrior died protecting a weakling. Tens of thousands of enemy mechs have surrounded the capital. If the city falls, not only the king will be executed, but even the most beautiful queen will be at the mercy of others. The whole country unites to resist. However, refugees from other regions also flood the capital, overcrowding the city. With enemy forces blocking the exits, escape is impossible. Cleo, seeing reinforcements, quickly changes into her uniform. Although Krishna's military is weak, their advantageous terrain prevents the enemy from breaking through immediately. Io orders the main gate pried open, and a giant mech charges through the arrow rain, with other mechs positioning themselves for cover. Each bullet takes down a soldier, allowing the vanguard mechs to successfully breach the city walls. Borkus also uses his tail to reach the top, where a female warrior attempts to block him but is quickly knocked down from the wall. The outer gate is breached, prompting Krishna to activate their second line of defense, aiming to trap the enemy at the north gate. Meanwhile, Rygart is lost in confusion. If he hadn't been so weak, Gurge would not have had to sacrifice himself. But Sigan knows him too well and has already sent someone to locate him. Specialized equipment for Delphine is nearly complete, but time is running out. Io's squad has breached the city walls, and Borkus's army enters with overwhelming force. The female warrior decides to fight to the death, but Borkus hardly sees her as a threat. They not only have a numerical advantage, but also surpass Krishna in individual combat skills. Only Baldur can barely manage to hold them off. After returning to her room, Sigan found that Cleo had already changed her clothes. She asked Cleo to sit on the bed and drew the curtains for privacy. Once the guards had removed the room's straps, Sigan shared her feelings. She had been enduring a lot of stress, but always believed that Rygart would keep his promise to return. Then she told Cleo to leave on her own. The cooldown for Delphine is still 58 minutes. The mechs defending the capital are being destroyed, turning into piles of scrap metal. Yet, as soldiers, their duty is to defend their homeland. Behind them stand unarmed citizens, so even though resistance seems futile, they choose to fight to the end, guarding the last line of defense. At the same time, Narvi found her teammates, who had only sustained minor injuries. The enemy had shown them mercy. All were present except Gurge. The trio piloted headless, damaged mechs, rushing towards the capital. However, upon their return, they were shocked by the sight of mech debris piled at the north gate. Narvi sped into the capital, and soon Io's squad reached the city center first. Suddenly isolated, they were ambushed but reacted quickly, finding cover. Street fighting without knowing the terrain puts one at a disadvantage, so they decisively arranged for covering fire to facilitate their retreat. This is an invincible ancient mech that can effortlessly throw 10-ton darts, instantly annihilating vast enemy forces. Only Rygart, who possesses no magic, can operate this powerful war machine. Yet his country is on the verge of falling. The superpower Athens, coveting Krishna's quartz resources, has launched a brutal war of aggression. A million-strong army has invaded the capital, turning the city into a living hell. As the female general is about to be slain, Delphine descends from the sky, wielding a 10-ton giant sword, and charges directly at the enemy forces invading the capital. Since Rygart is considered a defeated foe, Borkus completely dismisses him. Seeing this, Rygart wastes no words, leaps into the air, and slams his giant axe down on Borkus. Upon landing, lacking magic, he picks up rocks to use as ranged weapons. As he turns for a surprise attack, Borkus blocks him with his tail. Rygart fights like a barbarian. Borkus crushes his giant axe and launches a flurry of attacks. Although Rygart uses the momentum to block, the mech's arm will surely be destroyed if this continues. Pushed to the edge of the city wall, the tenacious Rygart grabs Borkus's tail, flinging himself up, and attempts to tear apart Borkus's mech. Borkus, making a quick decision, sacrifices his tail without hesitation and begins to respect Rygart's strength. Indeed, Delphine is powerful, but its operator should not be underestimated. Borkus shoots at Rygart, whose attacks are unpredictable. While Borkus is distracted, Rygart suddenly grabs his leg and throws him to the ground. However, Borkus manages to trap Delphine, and Rygart, refusing to let go, tries to twist off his right leg, but is flipped over by the mech's other foot. Yet, a pressure gun is nearby. Surprisingly, Rygart does not use it, leaving Borkus puzzled. He never expected to be fighting a one-in-a-million magicless warrior. The weapon developed for Delphine was now ready. Sigyn raced into the battlefield on a motorcycle, delivering a cross-shaped dart to Rygart. Borkus, eager to see Delphine's true power, was boiling with excitement. Rygart underestimated the weight of the cross dart. Delphine was nearly swept away, and only by using inertia could Rygart swing the massive dart. Meanwhile, the third inner gate of Krishna's capital had fallen. Cleo escaped from the palace, nearly crushed by a collapsing bridge pillar. Io found her hiding in a corner and placed her in a recess on the mech's shoulder. Suddenly, 2 lead bullets were fired at them. Io hastily dodged, while Cleo looked back toward the palace, bidding farewell to Sigyn in her heart. Then, the mech shook violently as Narvi and her team charged in. Though without Gurge, her squad could still crush ordinary foes. Influenced by Cleo, Io couldn't perform to his usual strengths and told Cleo to escape on her own. Free of his burden, Io seemed transformed, leveraging his mech's superior capabilities. Narvi was nearly defenseless and was quickly knocked to the ground. At the critical moment, her teammates arrived. With no weaklings present, Io couldn't take on 3 at once and was overcome by a charging attack. Since Io had shown mercy earlier, they spared his life this time. However, Rygart was now in a tough battle. Though the cross dart gave him the power to destroy anything, it significantly reduced his agility, making his attacks consistently miss. The king was observing the situation from the city walls. His subordinates urged him to go indoors to escape the rain. However, Rygart, a non-magic user, was fighting fiercely against a powerful enemy to protect the nation. As king, having requested Rygart's help, he couldn't justify hiding from a bit of rain. But the true reason Rygart fought was for the king's wife, the queen. Sigyn spared no expense for Rygart's sake, crafting his weapon from the finest materials, which even Borkus could not destroy. However, Rygart was physically weaker than Borkus and passed out first. Borkus wanted to destroy Delphine's cockpit to see Rygart's true face, but a severe jolt woke Rygart, who resumed swinging his giant cross-shaped dart. The third round of fighting began. Borkus opened fire with his machine gun, but Delphine, using the weight of the cross dart, leapt into the sky. Borkus's mech was ambushed and had its left leg disabled, losing balance and unable to dodge Delphine's slashing attack. Though disarmed, he displayed instincts like Gurge, firing a standard air pressure pistol. Rygart, watching the relentless Borkus, was flooded with past memories. Rigart successfully defended Krishna, embodying the motto inscribed on Delphine, "Defy fate." Alone, he overcame Borkus, who was many times more powerful, and honored his promise to Seguin. But the war was not over. More intense battles awaited them.